It's October 11th, 2022. Welcome to Podcast. I'm Rico Brouwer, its host, with my returning guest, Mr. Martin Armstrong, about the plot to seize Russia. Now, podcast in Dutch is a pot with candle. Conversations of hope with activists, journalists, and forecasters. Hello, Martin Armstrong. Welcome back.
Oh, thank you for inviting me.
Apologies beforehand. I've got a bit of a cold, so let's come to my voice. If I keep the volume down, then I shouldn't break up. I'm in good health otherwise. Thank you for being back here. The way I would introduce you would be a historian, economist, and forecaster Martin Armstrong, who as a computer programmer created a system called Socrates that analyzes history, current events, and the flow of money. And so that thing can forecast what may lie ahead. And last time we spoke was a year ago, October 12th, 2021. And you said in that thing, we're on a financial and economic trajectory that is falling apart as we speak. Welcome back. How are you doing, Marty?
Oh, pretty good.
So how is that falling apart doing? I mean, I feel like we're in a worse place than we were a year ago. Back then we had the repo crisis and what have you, but now things are literally falling apart.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically all the economic theories that they've been using for centuries now are falling apart. I mean, even Keynes, before he died, said that he was fighting against the theory of Adam Smith, the invisible hand, and he hoped that invisible hand would save Britain, that his own theories were wrong. I mean, it's the same thing with communism or anything. I mean, this idea that government can actually steer the economy one way or the other is kind of absurd, because they end up with their own self-interests. They get in the way, oh, gee, I got to do this because, we have elections coming up or whatever. It's, when communism fell, they saw that all the leaders had secret places where they were drinking champagne and everything else, pretending they were on a military base, so. I mean, that's just the way it is. Okay. No matter who you put in charge, you're always going to have that.
So what I wanted to do in this conversation is discuss two separate topics. And actually, leading into that, you just mentioned what we will talk about. So first off, what's currently happening in the world economically, financially, and with the war with Russia. And then after that, new information has come to light about what took place 25 years ago after the fall of the Soviet Union. And you put that together in your upcoming book, The Plot to Seize Russia, based on Freedom of Information Act information from the Clinton Library. Interesting. And I read parts of it that you sent me. So those two topics. And after that, we're going to look at the World Economic Conference that you do in Orlando, November 11th and 13th, through 13th. My question there is, but maybe answer it later on. That's immediately following the elections in the United States. So that's going to be interesting. Is that on purpose or no?
Yes, because I mean, it's very important that way, but it's also a key cyclical target in our models for Ukraine and Russia that same week.
Huh. Did you know just today, Tulsi Gabbard came out and said the Democratic Party has fallen under the control of an elitist cabal of warmongers? Huh. She calls on every night. It was just posted on her blog, and she calls everybody to leave the Democratic Party. Now that's what's going on there. So
well, I mean, she's actually correct. I mean, it's these people that have seized control of the Democratic Party are, I can't even rationalize what their ideal goals are. But the main thing that they seem to be focused on is this climate change. And in the end, what they're doing is they think if they can take down Russia because 50% of its GDP is all based upon selling energy.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just totally insane.
Okay, so my first question on the current events part is this. I'm recording this from the Netherlands. We're in the European Union. And if things weren't falling apart a year ago, they certainly are now. But maybe we start in UK. The central bank is now buying government bonds over £5 billion a day in an attempt to prevent a fire sale of government debt. That's what I read in the news. So what's your outlook, or Socrates' outlook, on the current situation in the UK, Marty?
Well, it's pretty much the same thing for all these governments, even in the US. I mean, we have to understand that they've been borrowing since World War II, year after year with a deficit, with no intention of ever paying anything back. So then you took interest rates down to negative there in Europe in 2014, and they wiped out their pension funds. Because 70% generally on average of pension funds by law had to have government bonds.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't even make these policies up. I mean, it's like the Three Stooges are making all these decisions. I mean, it's crazy.
I believe where I am, pensioners are worried that about inflation mainly, but not per se that their funds will be gone. I mean, has that changed with the UK? Are pension funds now down the drain within a year, or how does that work?
Most of them are, I would say maybe they have till 25. That's about it. Yeah, I mean, these laws have undermined the entire pension system. I mean, even back in the 90s, I was asked to come up and revise the U.S. Social Security system. And, I went, I went down to Capitol Hill and we were going to, proposing to turn it into like a wealth fund. So instead of all the money going in 100% to government bonds, that would be parceled out to fund managers. And I said, this is the way we do it. Okay, you could look at their track record, and the Democrats wouldn't vote for it because they said, oh, when they got back into power, they wanted to change the fund managers. I said, this has got nothing to do with who they voted for. It's who's the best fund manager. I don't care if he never even voted, and it's always about what do they get out of it, and that's the problem.
I would say in the UK, what they get out now is live week by week and avoid that fire sale, as it's called in even financial newspapers. And you claim all countries are the same, but and also you have said before, EU is the fall of EU financially is imminent. So who's first then? I have a personal interest here. I'm in the Netherlands, in the EU.
Well, that when they were creating the euro, they actually came to me. They attended our conference in London, and the sales pitch was that, create the euro, we'll all be paying the same interest rate, etc. And I said, it's not going to work that way unless you consolidate the debts. But at the time, Chancellor Kohl of Germany, he did not allow the German people to vote on it. And he admitted that he did it more like a dictatorship. He just pushed it through. And because of that, he knew that the German people would not vote for it if you're going to consolidate the debts from Greece and everything else. Yeah. So that was the problem. And I was told, look, we just have to get the euro in, and then we'll worry about the debts later. Well, here we are, more than almost 20 years later, and it's just the same thing. I mean, They never addressed the debts. And now you have people saying, oh, well, gee, it's not fair. This one country is paying higher interest rates than we are. I explained to them that, yes, the United States has one currency, but 50 states, they all pay different interest rates according to their own credit worthiness. That's it. Only the federal government paid a single interest rate. That was it. And so unless you consolidated the debts, Europe was going to be the same thing as the United States. Every country was going to be different. And you're seeing that unfolding now. In the UK, the policies that are going through, are just kind of insane, really. And then you have Truss standing up and saying, oh, Russia's got to be pushed out of Crimea. And, do they even understand what they're talking about? How many people would die to do that? And for what? We're talking about some little piece of land that was always Russian to begin with.
Yeah, we'll do Russia in a moment. So we will discuss that in more detail. But so out of my personal interest with Socrates, and you all, this is your life's work. You see cycles in pretty much everything in human behavior and long-term cycles. So now the EU is in decline, Europe is in decline, or globally we're in decline. I'm 51. Should I leave the EU, or is it going to recover in my lifetime, cyclically spoken?
No, we're not looking really at a recovery in that sense. We're looking at more of kind of like, Rome. Rome came together. That's when you're creating civilization. Everybody's benefiting. And that's what you come together for. Then when you start dividing, and so this one's doing that, or that one's doing this, then you start separating. So we're looking at the very term, of separation, suburbia, is basically what happened with Rome. They called it suburbia. And that's when you ended up with the feudal system. All these places began to break apart because the central government could no longer basically deal with it. Even in the 3rd century, Rome split into 3 parts. It had the Gallic Empire, which was France and Britain. And then in the east, you had, Queen Zenobia Palmyra in Syria. She grabbed Egypt and that area. And, so you're looking at the same sort of thing where I don't see even the United States surviving that way. I had one employee I just spoke to this morning who had left Florida, went back because of her family was up there in New Jersey, and she wants to come back. She says, it's like a foreign country up here anymore. The same thing. We have nothing in common from Florida to California. It's like a foreign country out there.
Just yet you have the US dollar in common. Jerome Powell, who is the head of the Federal Reserve System in the United States, has been criticized for his raising of interest rates. And he says, well, I might continue doing this. And as a consequence, markets outside of US may be destroyed. This is leading into a question. What's your outlook on US dollar, which is gaining in strength as opposed to all the other currencies? And what's the consequence for that? Or is there for BRICS countries like Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa?
The Federal Reserve has actually become the central bank of the world. And this is a natural sequence because of what's happened on 2 fronts. One is that Europe has routinely canceled currencies for a long time. Even Britain, cancels their 10-pound notes, and they're no longer good after such and such. The US dollar is the only one that's never been canceled. All right, so dollars are 70% of them circulate outside the United States. They're used in Russia, China, because they know they're not going to be canceled. And so that in part has also made the dollar more of a reserve currency. And then secondly, is that the U.S. was bankrupt in 1896. That's when J.P. Morgan had to lend the U.S. Treasury $100 million in gold to bail it out. And then it was World War I and World War II that made the United States the financial capital, because all the money left Europe and moved to America. So when you got tanks running down the street blowing up your banks, I don't think you're going to leave your money there. And here again, we have this insanity of talking about war with Russia. So honestly, this only sends capital to the dollar. In the same way as it did with World War I and World War II.
Okay, let's move there then, because there might be an interest for European Union to go to war as well as the United States. And all focus now, at least here on television, is either on inflation or on the conflict in Ukraine with Russia. Now, you have a daily newsletter, ArmstrongEconomics.com. And today you posted there, the Ukraine war is really the start of World War III. This will never end. Even if Putin withdrew, the West would move in for the kill. So what's your outlook on the Ukraine conflict then?
Well, it's more or less as I've said, that you have neocons, like it was John McCain and there's others, Brennan, Bolton, etc., who can't sleep at night without hating Russia. Politico even did a piece on it and showed that John McCain was always talking against Russia before Putin was there. And so you change the leader and nothing changes. They still bash Russia. And this is just simply the way it has always been. And these documents that I've gotten, which now confirm what I had said in the movie, The Forecaster, most people don't even realize, but when Russia collapsed in 1991, NATO went and said, okay, fine, we'll accept you and you can join NATO. And Russia has its own neocons, right? And they staged a coup against Gorbachev, because to them, if he agreed to that, it was like surrendering to the United States. So they staged a coup against him, and that's when Yeltsin stood on the tank and all that, and basically they were defeated. But that's what that was really about. And most of this has been left out of history books. But I've got the documents that show exactly what was going on.
Okay, let's go there then. But first, that Forecaster movie, it was, you were not allowed to see that in the United States. Is it still blocked?
Yeah, you can, if you're outside the United States, you can call it up and look at it on Amazon. If you're an American, you're not allowed to.
Still, okay.
Still.
So let's go back in time, 25 years. Russia was invited to join NATO as a member state, right after the fall of the Soviet Union. You open your new upcoming book with if I understand correctly, so correct me if I'm wrong, with a 2004, now declassified document from the American embassy in Russia under the Clinton administration. So you got that document and others through Freedom of Information Act, FOIA. It's now in the public domain. What was in that document?
Basically, the reason I call it the seizure of Russia is that this is even how Putin came to power. Yeltsin was basically in the middle between the oligarchs led by Berezovsky, who created their Davos Pact in 1996, and the hardline communists. They filed an impeachment motion to try and get rid of Yeltsin, and then they were the ones who were going to take Russia back to the USSR days. So I've got all the transcripts of the communications, phone calls between Yeltsin and Clinton. And Yeltsin basically turned to Putin. He was not a member of any party. And this nonsense, oh, he's ex-KGB. Yeah, he was a low-level guy in the KGB who immediately quit in 1991, as soon as everybody was free. So, his own documents show that he was never a major spy or something like that, was never the head of it. So Yeltsin turned to him, and it specifically says in there that, look, he's a stand-up guy, and he's neither an oligarch nor a communist. I think part of the propaganda was started by Baryshnovsky because he wanted to become president. And when Yeltsin turned to Putin, then it was like he went after him and said, oh, he's a communist, ex-KGB, all this stuff, and trying to prevent him from winning the election in 2000.
So that's where this story became complicated for me to understand. So I started digging around history. I'm 51. I mean, this is 25 years ago, and I didn't pay as much attention back then as I could have maybe. So Berezovsky, according to Wikipedia, is Russia's first billionaire, like oligarch. And he left Russia shortly after Putin came to power. Now, what you claim is that Berezovsky plotted with some Westerners, let's say, call it that, to have Russia join NATO and then him become president. Is that
this is all laid out in the documents, and what's interesting is that he was all the conversations between him and the American ambassadors, etc., all laid this out. You support me, we'll take over Russia. We're not, political. We're only interested in business. And he wanted it to join NATO, which was the original offer. So, the UN, the documents do not confirm that the US said yes, but they also do not confirm that it said no. So I suspect that those, they probably said yes and refused to release those documents. But it's clear that, that's what was going on. And Yeltsin was being blackmailed from two sides. So that's why he turned to Putin. And actually, his last words to him was, take care of Russia.
Yeah.
So I think that what's interesting is that, yes, Baryshnovsky then fled. And then you have other propaganda out there from like Bill Browder, et cetera, saying, oh, Putin's the richest man in the world, 200 billion. If he took 100% of all the oligarchs' money, it wouldn't even come close to 200 billion. So this is all propaganda as well. And the documents show that, yes, there was a meeting between Putin and the oligarchs, and not one of them says that he demanded 50% of their money. They basically all said simply that what they basically said was that they would have to, you stay out of politics and I'll let you keep your money. That's it.
Yeah.
Okay. So that none of these documents confirm any of that nonsense that's out there.
So let's try to make sense on what really happened back then, especially now that we're again, or maybe still, that would be the main question. Are we again fighting Russia and Putin, or are we still? But back in the day, USSR has fallen. We had come out of the Cold War era. All that was left was Russia, and there was an offer on the table to have Russia join NATO. Either that or another agreement that we'll touch upon shortly. Now, from the outset, Russia joining NATO would feel like a good idea. I mean, if you're in a group of friends, at least you wouldn't fight amongst each other. But back then, so that I have to ask questions. So was that offer sincere then? Were they sincere in expanding the family of NATO, or were they trying to put an end to independent Russia?
Well, I think a little bit of both, basically. And you have all this propaganda that was, out there also. Oh, Putin's interested in resurrecting the USSR. Well, he's had 20 years and he didn't make any move to do any such thing.
No.
And he's the only leader that criticized even Lenin. So he called him, oh, he was just a Bolshevik, and he destroyed the basically what he called the great empire, which was that of the czars. He was not a Stalin sort of guy, and it's just, it seems more of you have people that had spent their whole life that Russia is the evil empire, and then all of a sudden it collapses, then you don't have somebody to hate, basically. I think that's really part of the problem.
Yeah.
And if Russia is not the enemy, then why do we need NATO? So I mean, suddenly you're looking at an awful lot of money going into military operations that wouldn't be necessary.
Jens Stoltenberg just came out and said, if just like hours ago, if Putin wins, it will be the defeat for all of us. So this is an existential threat to Jens Stoltenberg be the head of NATO. So,
yeah, if you look at what is real and separate all this propaganda, the Donbass east of the river, all right, was always the Russian Empire of the czars. Okay, from the Donbass, Khrushchev came. Okay, Khrushchev was actually in charge of Kiev and rebuilt it after World War II. After him came Brezhnev, who was born right there in the Donbass. Yeah. So if this is not Russia and it's really Ukraine, then the first two leaders are really Ukrainian. Stalin was from Georgia. All right. So one of the debates in Moscow is who's really Russian.
So let's analyze what happened back then. In your book, you write, because this is also your story, and you were seeing it from your own personal perspective at the time, but you didn't. I imagine you didn't see all aspects of it only until recently. Your suspicions maybe became confirmed. You're right. I found myself in the middle of perhaps the greatest espionage or attempt at regime change of Russia in modern history. What was being hidden from the world was a plot to seize control of Russia, which was why Yeltsin turned to Putin on August 9th, 1999, with his parting words, "Take care of Russia." Now then you go on to argue that there was a plan A, plan B, and plan C to seize Russia. Plan A being, well, let's get Berezovsky in charge of Russia and have them join NATO. That plan failed. Then they went for plan B. And there's a chapter in your book called The Blackmail of Yeltsin. And that was probably a story that you told in the Forecaster, and that landed you in jail also. And I can imagine you go at the time going, what's going on here? What did I do? What?
Well, yeah, I mean, they put me in civil contempt. So no trial, nothing. And they said, oh, because of $1.3 million is missing. Well, I had clients said, well, we'll put up the $1.3 million in cash. Denied. It has to be those assets. I mean, it was just a total excuse, really. And what it was that Baryshnovsky cut a deal with Edmund Safra and Republic National Bank. And they steered this money through the Bank of New York, which was part of it, the money that came from the IMF. And it turned into a real political nightmare. I have the conversation of Yeltsin with Clinton saying, listen, I'm sending over the Minister of Interior to investigate this Bank of New York. It's political. And they were trying to blackmail him into stepping down and handing the reins of power to Baryshnovsky. Now, where the bankers were involved was that they were being promised full access to all the Russian gold, energy, diamonds, rare earths, etc., which would all have been theirs. And the oligarchs, all of them, everybody was just strip mining, Russia. You have, Bill Browder out there saying, oh, he was trying to make Russia, ethical, etc. That was complete nonsense. What they were trying to do is that the Russian shares of like Gazprom, if they applied Western standards and could list them on the New York Stock Exchange, they would have made 30 times their money. It wasn't about making sure that it was ethical or whatever. It was about, it was all just propaganda to make a fortune on it. And everybody was strip mining the assets of Russia. The Harvard boys created the thing with coupons, etc. But then the people didn't get paid. So the oligarchs were buying these things for, okay, fine. You want to put food on the table? Give me your coupons. And that's how they all became billionaires. And they just strip mined all the assets of the country and left the people poor. And that's why Yeltsin was not so popular. In 1996, he was only at 10% in the polls, and the communists would have won. That was the Baryshnovsky formed the Davos Pact to rig the elections to make sure Yeltsin won. And in the documents, it even says, if we don't do this, we'll end up in Siberia.
Yeah, if you say the Davos Pact, let's put it in plain words so that I may better understand them. You would be talking about the World Economic Forum and the Klaus Schwab Pact, no?
Yes, in 1996, the oligarchs all met there. And that's where they agreed that they would rig the election in 1996 to make sure Yeltsin was reelected.
Yeah, rig the elections in Russia. Okay, we'll talk rigging elections in the US shortly. But yeah, I quoted that Plan A, Plan B, and they went with Plan B, like blackmail Yeltsin. So that's what actually took place. They tried to blackmail Yeltsin to the point where he said, "I have no escape. Putin, help." Save Russia. So that was Plan B. Plan C was the plot to take down Putin. Now, John Bolton, you mentioned him earlier, said October 4th, a couple of days ago, on Chris Cuomo's News Nation, "We've demonstrated we've got that ability, given Qasem Soleimani an early exit, and we can find Putin as well." So is it idle, or are they still looking to assassinate Putin?
Look, John Bolton was also against taking troops out of Afghanistan. He is just a warmonger. He always has been. He would, I don't know how he would live if there was no enemy. He'd have to, go after his ex-wife or something, I guess. I don't know. I went to Mar-a-Lago for dinner there when Trump was president in March of 2020. And I met most heads of state. He was the first one that I ever met who stood up and said that he wanted to take the troops out of Afghanistan. He said he was sick and tired of writing letters to people that their son died in war. And he actually said, what are they dying for? They've been fighting over borders out there for 1,000 years. What difference are we going to make? He was the first world leader of any country that I ever heard was ever concerned about those that die on the battlefield. Everybody else, oh yeah, we got to kill Putin. We got to do this, drive him out of Crimea. Well, why don't you get out there in the front lines? But they were always willing to send somebody else's, children out to do it, but never themselves.
Yeah. Okay. In your book, you explain how NATO, after the fall of the USSR, invaded Russia to join. And in those declassified documents, it also said that the US understood that it is not true that the US would want to weaken Russia. as a weakened Russia would be a dangerous partner. I can imagine that being sincere at the time, but currently we've removed Russia from SWIFT, we're blowing up Nord Stream pipelines, we're imposing trade sanctions, all appears to want to make Russia weak and thus turn it in a dangerous adversary, as was predicted back then, so it's intentional. So this would be the key question. Has that always been the case, looking to make Russia into an enemy, or has that recently changed because we really need an enemy now with the economy falling apart?
I think a little bit of both, but you have people like Bolton, who's been, every aspect that he has done in his career has been to create some sort of proxy war against Russia. Syria, it was about a pipeline that Qatar wanted to run through Syria to compete with Russia to Europe. And Syria said no. So then it was like, oh, he's abusing his people and we should go in there and kill him. And it was all to to try and take control. They did the same thing with Iraq. There was never any weapons of mass destruction. Afghanistan, even Hillary Clinton bragged about how they defeated Russia there. These people are obsessed with this idea of Russia and have always been this way.
Yeah, either that or so. This preparing for this interview, this is what I'm curious about. So you say the Clinton administration was well aware that in 1996 at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, Berezovsky created his Davos Pact. So that was under Bill Clinton, the Clinton administration. Now, Hillary Clinton married to Bill. She was aware of that as well. So then with the declassification, so I quote again from your book, with the declassification of these key Clinton documents, it also became obvious why Hillary Clinton blamed Putin for interfering in her presidential election of 2016. So this is the question. Is it just a personal thing between the Clintons and Putin?
I think for Hillary, yes. She has been one of these neocons and always advocating war against Putin. Even with Ukraine, she's come out and said that, we can defeat Russia as we did in Afghanistan. I think that's largely why she went, she blamed Putin. It was just nonsense, but, she blamed everybody but herself. We had a number of girls in our office in their 20s. They all voted against her because she wanted equal rights for women, and that meant being drafted into the army. So I would tease them. I said, well, maybe you might look good in army boots, But they all voted against her because of that. They called her more or less a feminine Nazi from the 60s, a different era. I'd say the girls in their 20s don't respect the same ideas from back then. Culture changes.
I feel that this information now released under FOIA, and it's in the public domain, so everybody should be able to take that in and analyze that. That's explosive. So that finally we learn what has been going on, and personal vendettas even between Clintons and Putin. So my question to you is, to your knowledge, have journalists picked up on your story already?
No. I think, you have to understand that what I also put in the book was there was a journalist at Bloomberg, Mark Pittman, who did articles on us before. He actually looked at what we were doing in Japan. And when they started all this nonsense, he immediately came and he says, Marty, don't worry about it. We're not going to let them do this. And Bloomberg took him off the case, wouldn't allow him to write about me, and handed it to somebody else that only did put out whatever the government said. And I met a guy who was the executive vice president of New York Post. And when he joked with me, he said, I just wanted to thank you. Every time we put you on the front page, we always sold an extra 100,000 copies. I said, oh, that's nice. And he said, look, we all knew that you were innocent the day that they threw the press out. But he then explained what goes on. He says, the government calls you. They say, we have a favor. And if you do not do what they want, then next thing you know, IRS is investigating you or whatever. They have weaponized the legal system. I mean, as we see what they're going on after, Trump and anybody that was there in the Capitol taking a selfie, 5 years in prison, I mean, and then they want to talk about Putin being an authoritarian. I mean, take a look at yourself in the mirror here.
Okay, so mainstream journalists are not picking up on the story. Some journalists are. Or when you talk to Ravoya Moritz of Geopolitics and Empire, you're talking to me. So not all is lost. But so this leads into a serious question. You named your computer program Socrates, after the philosopher that lived some 400 years before Christ. Socrates back then was tried for not adhering the religions of that time and sentenced to death for mocking the judiciary. You're mocking the judiciary as well.
Yes.
Do you feel safe, Marty?
Realistically, I mean, eventually, sure, they will do whatever they want to do. I mean, you either live cowering in a corner of a room in darkness, or you just say the heck with it, and this is it. I don't care. What I can say is that when they constantly will threaten you, and when they push you to such an extreme that you no longer really think about death. I mean, that's what Patrick Henry said, either give me liberty or give me death. And people don't understand. I mean, sometimes death is not so scary compared to living under what some of these people do. I mean, you want to walk around with a piece of tape on your mouth for the rest of your life? I mean, I went behind the Berlin Wall before it fell. A friend of mine was born there, but the day the wall went up, he was walking with his grandmother on the right side of the street. And he always wanted to go back to see his family because the rest of them were trapped there. And we went. I said, fine, I'll go. I want to see this. This is the late 70s. And his cousin took us around. And if anybody was remotely close to us, she would go through the routine. Oh, this is our pure. They take such wonderful care of us, whatever. And as soon as everybody was away, she said, oh, they're no good, pieces of, I saw that back then, and people don't realize what we're going towards, this cancel culture. Oh, it's not a way to live. It's just not. I saw it behind the Berlin Wall, and we're doing the same thing to ourselves.
I have the same memory, kind of. I was growing up, and we went to Poland back then, and there was this guy, I've forgotten his name. And then he would only talk privately when he knew no one was listening about his true opinion of what was going on. But that would not be done in public. There was fear more than anything.
One of the cameramen that was on the movie grew up in the East, Germany there. And he said when the wall came down and his father went and got a Stasi file, he came home and started punching holes in the walls. He thought his father was crazy. He started pulling out microphones.
Exactly.
And then he said he would never talk again to anybody other than family because he found out all his friends, he thought, were ratting on him.
Okay, you're now bringing out a new book shortly. You're giving it away, as I understand it, to people attending your World Economic Conference. Do you think that book is going to be banned also in the US?
I don't know.
All bets are off. Could be.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, we will see. I mean, I hope not, but I mean, because these documents are in the public domain. So, it's not like I'm leaking something that's top secret or,
Oh.
I mean, they're there. You can, probably get them off of the internet by now yourself. I mean, I've just put it all together because I was in the middle of this. I mean, they were trying to get me to invest $10 billion into this Hermitage Capital Fund, which was eventually, seized in Russia because it was, the one funding a lot of this stuff.
Over the last couple of years, you were not able to do the World Economic Conference the way you were used to, and you ended up doing it remotely through internet or what have you. And now you came out and said, well, maybe, just maybe, I mean, it's still a month from now, maybe this time we're going back to normal. So can you tell us, what are you looking forward to, and what is your World Economic Conference?
Well, what these are is that we go over what the computer is projecting for Europe, Asia, United States. It's all done that way. And the main reason that we were always the largest institutional advisor is because everybody knows this is not my personal opinion. It's what does the computer project? It puts out these forecasting arrays that people can see. It's not, and it's writing itself over 1,000 reports every day. So there's nobody there editing this stuff. Our reports are not even blocked in China. And because they know, don't have to worry about on page 3, by the way, overthrow your government or something, it's so, I mean, I've been with so many different central banks. I mean, even when the Asian currency crisis happened, the China central bank called me up and I went over there. I was helping them actually become more or make the transition to capitalism. And it was very interesting from the standpoint that they were tracking, there were 249 varieties of tea. I never knew there were that many different varieties of tea. But under communism, if it was $1 in one place, it had to be $1 someplace else. And they were not interfering. They were just watching everything. And they were asking me, why is this tea that's selling for like $1 here, like $10 over there? And I said, well, first you have transportation costs. Oh, yeah, okay, I understand. I mean, it was at that level. If you grew up and it's $1 here and $1 there, even if it costs you $10 to get it there, that was normal.
So on maybe close there on the economic situation in Europe, which to me feels like it's fallen apart. And some would say when all else fails, they take you to war. Is the reason European Union leaders are advocating conflict with Russia because they know their financial system is falling apart, or are they just stupidly following warmongers?
No, I think they do know it's falling apart. There's no way this current monetary system can possibly last. So the talk behind the curtain is that they want another Bretton Woods. And to do that, they need a war. And then that is the excuse, oh, we defaulted, but not because of us, it was Putin that did it, It's like you have Biden calling it, the inflation's all Putin's fault, this was set in motion by COVID. You shut down transportation and small companies and things of this nature. I had, one girl who was a personal assistant. She had quit, got married, and her husband opened a spa maybe about 6 months before COVID hit, and they lost everything they had. And nobody's there to say, "Oh, gee, sorry." They acted like this was the Black Plague. 40% of the population would be dead. It was just absurd. I think it was more an exercise of power, really, to be able to control the people. And I mean, you still see the psychological damage. You still see people walking around with masks, even though you can Google, and even the Washington Post did an article on it and said masks did nothing during the flu epidemic of 1918. And even Fauci had said masks didn't do anything, but all of a sudden then they worked for this one.
Yeah.
It was all just a lot of propaganda, and I think mainly to see what they could control and get away with. But the financial system as it stands cannot possibly survive. Well, I mean, all they've been doing is borrowing year after year, and then they have extracted the money from pension funds to do this, and then they lower the interest rates to try and stimulate the economy and wipe out the pension funds. I mean, it's honestly, this is like the Three Stooges. I mean, nobody has ever even thought about how to run an economy properly, and this is what we're facing. So I think they do need war, basically, just as the excuse, but I don't think they anticipate nuclear war, or if it's nuclear, it will be just tactical nukes, or you take out a city.
I cannot imagine Putin giving them the war they need.
Well, you can actually Google the Daily Wire, February 23rd, the day before Putin went in. Yeltsin stood up and said that Ukraine was going to take in and look for nuclear weapons. I mean, the Minsk agreement was brokered between Germany and France. And after 91, the deal was that Ukraine had to remain neutral, and NATO would not go in and Russia would not go in.
Yeah.
And it's just absurd, all of this. And it's clearly provoking a war. I mean, they've done everything they possibly can to do so. And this is what's going on.
So your computer system, Socrates, is projecting changes. You call this year will be the calm before the storm. So mayhem will start next year, and also in November, big changes may come. We are.
I mean, our computer is projecting 2023 as a year from political hell. I mean, both civil unrest you're looking at because of inflation that they have created, and the war in Ukraine. I mean, Zelensky is just a comedian who danced around in high heels, and he just put out a statement calling on NATO to attack Russia nuclear first. I mean, this guy is just I've never seen in my 40-year career, I've never seen world leaders do anything other than seek world peace. It's like the other side of the coin. Everybody wants war.
I wish you good health, Martin. Stay safe. Keep us posted through your channels. You just vast knowledge and information coming through us. ArmstrongEconomics.com. Any last remarks that you would share with?
Well, I mean, I stay safe over there, and maybe stock up some food because of what they're doing to your farmers.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Het gaat hier vandaag over saamhorigheid.
Dagje zonder hemel.
Rustig, lieg niet. Normaal maken is wat niet is normaal.
Alleen
Every nation
maar blauwe
in
lucht.
every region now has a decision to make.
En dan ook geen hel meer.
You think I'm joking? Predator
Dat
drones.
is best makkelijk.
never see it coming.
Wat dacht je, alle mensen?
Laat staan dat ik kan ingaan over vuur.
Bezig met vandaag.